Hello, and welcome to Andrew's Excursions Online Edition. My name is Andrew Riedl, and I will be your host and guide as we explore the remains of the Boston and Maine system all over New England. Everything from active railroads that operate on former Boston and Maine tracks, to long-abandoned lost rights-of-way, to stations of all kinds. If it relates to the Boston and Maine, it will be explored here. We will kick off our series with a stroll on the newly constructed Mass Central Rail Trail, which has recently been constructed on the old Boston and Maine Central Mass line right-of-way. The Central Mass was once upon a time a 104-mile railroad, connecting Boston and Northampton, passing through the predominantly rural central part of the Commonwealth. It was never a huge success, and most of it was abandoned by 1980. Recently, the town of Weston opened their portion of the rail trail, and that is where we'll explore today, looking for traces of the lost railroad. So grab your backpack, hiking shoes, and camelback. We're going exploring. We'll start our hike at the Weston Depot and walk east towards Waltham. The right-of-way is mostly straight through this area, and aside from a few homes visible, has a very rural feel to it. You will notice the massive steel high-tension power line towers, which are a unique feature to this particular right-of-way. I have seen photos dating back to the 1950s with these towers in them, so I assume that is about when they were constructed. After rounding a bend, you will see one of the most interesting railroad artifacts on the trail up ahead in the distance. One of the most interesting railroad relics that can be viewed in Weston is this iron truss bridge, which at one time carried the Central Mass over the still very much active Fitchburg Division main line. The rail trail comes to an end just behind me in this picture, and we're looking eastbound over the bridge towards Waltham. Rails and ties still remain intact on the bridge, as it is not an official part of the trail yet. A telltale is still standing on the east side of the bridge as well, not visible in this photo. The bridge itself is still holding on after years of disuse despite the rust. Eventually this bridge could be incorporated into the rail trail, but for now continues to pass the time in solitude. I was fortunate in that the day that I hiked to the bridge, soon after I arrived, I heard the sound of an approaching MBTA commuter rail train and was able to snap a few pictures. The train is heading inbound under the Central Mass line towards North Station. It just departed Kendall Green Station, less than a mile to the west of here on the Fitchburg line. It is interesting to note that even though the two lines cross one another here, there is no and never was a physical connection between the two. They split from each other in Clematis Brook in Waltham. We will now head back west on the trail, and before we arrive back at Weston Depot, we pass this beautifully restored Boston and Maine milepost. The N stands for Northampton, which is 91 miles west of here, and the other side of the post announces that Boston is 13 miles away. This is one of 2 mileposts that I saw on my hike that day, and both of them are nicely restored and act as great reference points for trail users. These mileposts were once common on many B&M lines, and are always fun to see whether they're restored or not. Back at the historic Weston Depot, let's take a closer look at it together. I believe the building is privately owned, and while it looks like it has seen better days, it still retains some of its elegance and charm. It was built in 1881, the same year the Central Mass Railroad opened, and it was a combined passenger freight station, since Weston was a small town with modest railroad needs. The land around the depot is well overgrown today, but siding tracks can still be found in the brush. The order board has long been without blades, and the roof needs work, but this building has the potential to someday be beautifully restored. Looking back in time to 1930, At Weston Depot, you see a good picture of what once was at this location. The arch road bridge carrying Church Street over the tracks and the stairway down to the platform still exist 90 years later. The structure was built in 1912 as part of a grade separation effort. The station building and platform look to be well cared for. This was from the line's better years before service cuts began. This is a Benton photograph, and I'd like to thank the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society for kindly giving me permission to include it in this presentation. Continuing to hike west from Weston towards the next stop at Cherrybrook, we continue to keep our eyes peeled for more B&M artifacts. After passing under Conant Road through a newly constructed underpass, the concrete base of a former block signal catches our eyes. While the central mass never had heavy traffic volume, it did have electronic signaling as seen here. Notice the 4 contact points on the corners where the signal would connect to. These bases can be found on many abandoned rights-of-ways, and due to their size and function are easy to spot. On the subject of traffic volume on the old Central Mass, let's take another step back in time to examine passenger trains. After the 1938 hurricane, the Central Mass was cut into 2 long branches, one from Boston to Oakdale, and the other from Northampton to Wheelwright. Passenger trains to Boston were cut back to Hudson in 1958 and further to South Sudbury in 1965. A single Budd car continued to provide the service until 1971, when after a brief period of increased service, all service ended. This photo, taken by H. Bentley Crouch on October 29, 1971, shows a single RDC running through Weston on track that had seen no maintenance in many years. As picturesque as this scene is, the end is near for passenger service on the Central Mass in Weston. Less than a mile west of Weston Station is the site of Cherrybrook Depot, which was nothing more than a simple shelter where Concord Road crossed the railroad. Another milepost is at the depot site, and it appears to have been recently transplanted to a new foundation hole. I have seen pictures of the old shelter still standing here in the mid-1980s. However, the structure is long gone today, having either been demolished or burned down. There is still a pile of rubble marking the exact location, and the boulders were placed next to the former track site as well for some reason. Cherrybrook was the other station on the Central Mass in Weston. While we pause for a moment at Cherrybrook, let's take a look back at freight service on the Central Mass in its later years. After the end of passenger service in 1971, freight trains continued to infrequently run on the line as far west as Berlin. Freight business was virtually non-existent in Weston, however, and most trains crept through the woods on the poorly maintained track without stopping, unless they derailed, which some of them did. In this H. Bentley Crouch photo from 1974, a Boston Maine GP7 engine and caboose creeps slowly by the unused shelter at Cherrybrook on awful track on its way to Hudson. Notice that this local freight consists of only the engine and caboose, a testament to almost complete lack of business at this time. Walking back from Cherrybrook to Weston Station, the final item that caught my eye was this old stone culvert just to the west of the Conant Road underpass. These culverts were built to last, and it's quite possible that this could date from 1880 when the railroad was built. These can be easy to miss if you're not looking for them, so it's extra rewarding to spot one while on a hike. While the specific culvert was not designed to handle large volumes of water, its simple yet practical design has withstood the test of time and should easily survive for many more years. While it's somewhat obscured by brush, the fact that I explored the line in April definitely assisted with my being able to spot this. We have reached the end of this adventure, but this is only the beginning of our Boston and Maine explorations. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, keep on exploring.